The Arizona sun is bleeding out across the asphalt of Highway 60 South, painting the long ribbon of two-lane blacktop, the color of rust and copper and old wounds. Heat rises from the road in sheets you can see through. There is no shoulder. There is no exit. There is only 1.5 miles of empty pavement between concrete and embankment, and somewhere on that stretch, a small old Honda is slowing down. Behind it, a black Ford King Ranch is closing the distance. The grille fills the rearview mirror. The driver's face behind it is the wrong color. There is a steel flashlight on his passenger seat. Inside the Honda, a woman in blue scrubs is fumbling for a phone that has just fallen out of her hand. She does not see the horizon yet. She does not feel the asphalt beginning to tremble. But 40 miles back, where the road bends out of the basin and lifts toward the mountains, something is coming up over the rise. Something with 50 engines. The Phoenix sun did not set so much as collapse bleeding orange and copper across the asphalt of Highway 60 like a wound that refused to close. The temperature gauge on the dashboard of the faded 2009 Honda Civic read 103 degrees, and that was after the sun had been falling for nearly an hour. Heat radiated up from the pavement in shimmering sheets that warped the horizon, turning the long ribbon of highway into something that looked less like a road and more like a river of molten glass. Inside the Civic, Hannah Caldwell rested her forehead against the steering wheel at a red light and tried to remember how to breathe. 14 hours. 14 hours on her feet in the pediatric intensive care unit at St. Vincent Memorial Hospital. 14 hours of monitors and alarms and parents weeping in plastic chairs. 14 hours of running, of charting, of holding small hands too thin for any child to have. Her blue scrubs were wrinkled. Her hair, the color of wheat in autumn, had escaped its tie hours ago and now hung in damp strands around a face that had been pretty once before. Grief had carved out the soft places. There were faint shadows under her hazel eyes that no amount of sleep had been able to erase in 3 years. 3 years. That was how long it had been since Daniel. She did not let herself think the name, not here, not on the road, not when she had to drive. The light turned green and she lifted her foot from the brake. The Civic responded the way old cars respond to old drivers who have grown gentle with their machines, easing forward with a small protesting cough from somewhere in its undercarriage. The air conditioning was, as always, doing approximately nothing. The vents pushed out a tepid breath that smelled faintly of dust, and the cherry vanilla air freshener her daughter had insisted on the last time they had stopped at a gas station. Her daughter, Sophie. 5 years old, missing 2 front teeth, owner of a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Pancake, and the most ferocious sense of justice Hannah had ever encountered in a human being under 4 feet tall. Sophie, who was at home right now with the babysitter Mrs. Alvarado, who had to leave at 6 because her own grandchildren needed her, which meant that Hannah needed to be home by 6, which meant that Hannah, who had clocked out of St. Vincent at 4:37 in the afternoon, was already running on a schedule that had no slack in it at all. She glanced at the dashboard clock, 4:52. The phone in her purse buzzed. She did not pick it up immediately. There was a rule she had made for herself after Daniel about phones in cars. She had been on the phone with him when it happened. She had heard the steel beam break. She had heard him say, "Han, I love," and then nothing. Just nothing for the longest 7 seconds of her life. So now, when phones buzzed, she let them buzz. She let them wait until she could pull over, or until she was at a red light long enough to read whatever the message was without taking her eyes off the road for more than a heartbeat. But this was Mrs. Alvarado's 3rd call in 20 minutes. Hannah pulled the Civic onto the shoulder, put it in park, and dug the phone out of her purse with hands that did not want to stop shaking, even though she had told them hours ago that they were done shaking for the day. They never listened. 3 missed calls, 2 text messages. The first text read that Sophie had a fever of 102.4 and that she was asking for her mother. The second text, sent 6 minutes later, read that the fever had climbed to 103.1, that Tylenol had been given, and please, Hannah, please come home. She closed her eyes. For one moment, just one, she let herself feel the full weight of being 32 years old alone, raising a child whose father had been pulverized under 12 tons of falling steel on a construction site outside Mesa, working a job that demanded every ounce of her and paid her not quite enough to keep the lights on. She let herself feel it the way you let a wave crash over you when you have decided not to swim. Then she opened her eyes. She typed back that she was on her way. 20 minutes. Thank you, Maria. She put the phone in the cup holder, not back in the purse. She pulled the Civic onto Highway 60 South and pressed the accelerator harder than she usually did. 20 minutes. She could do 20 minutes. She had been a pediatric ICU nurse for 9 years. She had carried out CPR on a 6-month-old whose heart had stopped on her shift. She had told a mother that her son was not going to wake up. She had cleaned up after the worst things human bodies could do to themselves and to each other. And she had walked back into rooms with a smile because the children needed to see a smile. She could do 20 minutes of driving with a feverish kindergartner waiting at the other end of it. She did not yet know that the 20 minutes she was about to drive would be the longest 20 minutes of her life. She did not yet know about Dale Crawford. 40 miles back, where Highway 60 met the eastbound feeder from Apache Junction, Dale Crawford was sitting in the air-conditioned cab of a jet-black Ford F-25 O King Ranch with chrome push bars on the front and a tactical light bar mounted to the roof, drinking a tall boy of Coors that he had cracked open in the parking lot of a Circle K 12 minutes earlier. The truck cost him $81,000 2 years ago. It still smelled on a hot day like this one, faintly of new leather and old anger. Dale was 44 years old. He stood 6'3". He carried 240 pounds, most of it muscle gone to seed, the kind of body a man earns in his 20s laying concrete and then spends his 30s and 40s slowly drowning under bourbon and rage. His hair was a colorless buzz cut. His face was the deep perpetual red of a man with high blood pressure who refused to take the medication for it. He had a scar that ran from the corner of his left eye to his jawline, courtesy of a bar in Tucson that he could not legally enter anymore. He owned a small contracting business. He had owned a larger contracting business until 2 years ago, when a former employee had filed a labor complaint with the state, and the resulting investigation had revealed certain irregularities in how Dale paid his workers, which led to certain fines, which led to certain bank decisions, which led to the larger business becoming the smaller business. Dale had a theory about whose fault all of that was. The theory did not involve Dale. Today had not gone well. Today, Dale had lost a bid for the renovation of a strip mall in Glendale, a job worth $400,000, which he had been counting on the way a drowning man counts on a rope. The bid had gone to a smaller, younger contractor named Reyes, whose crew, in Dale's opinion, did not even speak proper English. Today, Dale's ex-wife had called him for the 3rd time this month about back child support, which Dale had told her with several adjectives that she would not be receiving. Today, Dale's truck had been keyed in the parking lot of the supply store on McDowell Road, and he was reasonably certain who had done it, but he could not prove it, which only made the rage worse. So Dale was driving home in a King Ranch that no longer felt like enough truck with a beer between his knees and a heavy steel Maglite flashlight on the passenger seat, a flashlight he kept there for what he called personal protection, but what was in actual practice a club. He was driving 16 miles an hour over the posted limit, and he was waiting the way men like Dale are always waiting for someone to give him a reason. Hannah Caldwell was about to give him a reason. She did not mean to. She did everything right. The right lane of Highway 60 South narrows into a single-lane merge half a mile before the Power Road exit, a construction zone that had been in place for 18 months, and with the orange signs promised be in place for at least 18 more. Hannah signaled. She checked her blind spot. She saw a gap between a pickup truck ahead of her and the massive black Ford behind it, and she eased the Civic into the gap with the smooth, practiced movement of a woman who had been driving the same stretch of road 5 days a week for 9 years. It was a textbook merge. She lifted 2 fingers from the steering wheel in the small, polite wave of the West, a thank you to the driver behind her for the space he had given her, although the truth was that he had not given her anything. She had taken what was hers by law and right. Dale Crawford saw the wave and read it the way men like Dale read everything, as a provocation. His hands closed around the steering wheel of the King Ranch. The knuckles went white. The scar on his face seemed to deepen. "Oh," he said to nobody, to the dashboard, to the part of himself that had been waiting all day for permission. "Oh, no, you don't, sweetheart." He pressed the accelerator. The F-250 surged forward like an animal. Hannah saw the grill appear in her rearview mirror, larger and closer and larger and closer, until all she could see in the mirror was the bright glare of headlights set high above her own roofline and a faint suggestion of a face behind them, mouth open, shouting. Her stomach dropped. She had been tailgated before. Everyone who drove in Phoenix had been tailgated before. You let them pass. You did not engage. You did not flash your brakes. You did not gesture. You did not look. You let them blow past you, and you let the rage spend itself on the road ahead, and you went home to your daughter. She tapped her brakes very gently, just the faintest flash of red, the universal request to please back off. The Ford's horn exploded. It was not a normal horn. Dale had installed an aftermarket stable air horn the previous summer, the kind built for semi-trucks, the kind that could be heard a quarter-mile away. The sound hit the Civic like a physical blow. Hannah flinched so hard she felt a twinge in her neck. Her heart, which had been running tired all day, began to run scared. "Okay," she whispered. Okay. She turned on her left blinker. She would move over. She would let him pass. She would get out of his way, and she would go home to Sophie, and she would never think about this man again. She began to ease the Civic to the left. Dale in the F-250 saw the blinker and the drift, and a slow smile crawled up the side of his face that was not occupied by the scar. He understood, with the particular clarity of cruelty, what she was trying to do. He was not going to let her. He yanked the wheel of the King Ranch hard to the left, gunning the engine, and the massive truck cut into the left lane in front of her, blocking her, walling her in. Hannah jerked her wheel back to the right. Tires squealed. The Civic's old suspension protested. For one heart-stopping second, she thought the car was going to fishtail into the concrete divider, and she heard somewhere far away, somewhere in the long corridor of her own life, the sound of a steel beam breaking, and Daniel saying, "Hon, I love." She did not fishtail. The Civic recovered. She was back in the right lane. The F-250 settled in beside her. The traffic on the highway, which had been heavy through the merge, was thinning out now. The 2 lanes ran along a stretch of road bordered on the right by a steep rocky embankment topped with creosote bushes, and on the left by a 6-foot concrete barrier that separated southbound from northbound. There were no shoulders. There were no exits. The next exit was Ellsworth Road, 2.5 miles ahead. 2.5 miles is a long way when there is no place to go. Hannah dared one quick glance to her left. Dale Crawford's window was down. His face was the color of raw beef. His mouth was moving, forming words she could not hear over the sound of the F-250's engine and the rushing wind, but she did not need to hear them to know what they were. His right hand left the steering wheel and came up against the glass of his own window, the middle finger extended, the gesture jerking up and down with the force of his fury. Then the steering wheel jerked. The Ford swerved into her lane. Not a full swerve, just enough to drift the front quarter of that massive truck into the airspace of her small old car, close enough that Hannah could see the rust on the running board, close enough that if she did not react, she would be crushed against the embankment. She jerked the wheel right. The Civic's right tires kicked up gravel from the shoulder that was barely there. Dale pulled back into his own lane. Then he did it again. She understood with a slow, cold clarity that worked its way up from her stomach into her chest that this man was going to kill her on this road. He was going to push her into the embankment, or he was going to make her overcorrect into the concrete, or he was going to do something else that ended with her in a heap of metal and her daughter sitting at home with a fever and a babysitter who had to leave at 6. Her hand left the steering wheel. She fumbled for the phone in the cup holder. She found it. She had it. She was lifting it. She was looking down for 1 second, 1 single second, just long enough to find the emergency call button. Dale had been waiting for her to do exactly that. He saw her head dip. He pulled hard on the wheel. The F250 lunged in front of her, cutting across both lanes, brake lights flaring. Hannah saw the brake lights through the top of her own windshield because she was already looking down. She stomped on the brake with both feet. The Civic shrieked, the tires locking the old anti-lock brakes, shuddering through the floorboards. The phone flew out of her hand, sailed past the gear shift, and disappeared into the dark space beneath the passenger seat. The Civic skidded. It fishtailed left, then right, then left again. The world outside the windshield rotated through the spectrum of things Hannah had hoped never to see while alive. The concrete divider, the embankment, the rear of the F-25, looming closer, closer, until at last the brakes caught and the car shuddered to a halt 6 inches from the truck's rear bumper. For one moment there was nothing. No sound, just the tick of her own engine, the smell of burnt rubber, the dust settling. Then the driver's door of the F-250 swung open. Dale Crawford stepped out into the road. He was a mountain. 6'3", 240 pounds, sweat-stained gray tank top, showing arms like thick ropes, the mag-light flashlight in his right hand. The flashlight was 18 inches long. It was made of machined aluminum. It weighed 2.5 pounds. It was, for all intents and purposes, a baton. He started walking toward her car. Hannah's body went into the place a nurse's body goes when there is an emergency and a patient is crashing, and there is no time to feel. She did not feel afraid. Not yet. She felt her hands move with terrible efficiency. She slammed the lock button on the driver's door. She slammed it again. She slid sideways across the bench, pressed her back against the passenger door, and she scanned the floorboards of the Civic for her phone. She could not see it. It had gone under the seat. Dale reached her window. He hit the glass with his open palm. The Civic shook. "Get out of the car," he said. His voice was not loud yet. It was conversational. That was somehow worse. "Get out of the car, lady. We are going to have a conversation, you and me." Hannah did not answer. She could not. Her throat was a closed door. He hit the glass again, this time with the side of his fist. The whole door panel rattled. "You think you can do that to me?" Dale said. The conversational tone was leaving now. The other one, the real one, was coming up to take its place. "You think you can just swing into my lane like that? You think because you drive a piece of junk you don't have to follow the rules? Get out of the car." She had her phone. She did not have her phone. She had to find her phone. She slid further toward the floor, reaching her fingers stretched into the dark beneath the passenger seat. She felt a pen. She felt the wrapper of a granola bar. She felt the cold edge of a metal seat rail. She did not feel the phone. Dale stepped back from the window. He raised the mag light. "All right," he said. "All right." Hannah saw what was coming. There was 1 second, exactly 1 second, when her brain told her body what was about to happen, and her body responded by curling forward, arms up over her head, the way you teach children to curl during a tornado drill. The flashlight came down. The driver's side window of the 2009 Honda Civic did not so much break as detonate. Tempered glass does not crack. It does not shatter into shards. It explodes into 1,000 small cubes, like rock salt, like hail, like a shower of clear, stinging stars. The cubes rained down across Hannah's back, her arms, her hair. A piece struck the back of her neck and drew a thin red line of blood. Another lodged in the band of her wristwatch. The smell of hot asphalt and exhaust rushed into the Civic. The sound of the world without a window in it, the wind, the traffic far behind them, Dale's breathing became suddenly terribly close. Dale leaned through the empty window frame. His shoulders were so wide they almost did not fit. His face was a foot from hers. She could smell the beer on him. She could smell the sweat. His eyes were not the eyes of a man. They were the eyes of something that had stopped being a man a long time ago and had only recently noticed. His left hand shot forward. He grabbed a fistful of the front of her blue scrub top, twisting the fabric, lifting. "I'm going to teach you a lesson," he said, "about respect." He began to pull. The edge of the broken window frame still had teeth in it, ragged spikes of unsmoothed glass and metal where the trim had cracked. He was pulling her toward those teeth. She would be cut to ribbons before she even cleared the window. She knew it the way she knew anatomy, the way a nurse knows what flesh does when it meets jagged steel. She kicked at him. She thrashed. Her foot caught the inside of the driver's door and the door panel cracked. She got one hand up and clawed at his face. She missed his eyes and got his cheek 4 red lines opening across the scar. He roared. His grip tightened on her scrub top. The fabric tore. She was being pulled out of her car. In the part of her mind that was still her, that was still Hannah Caldwell of Phoenix, Arizona, who had a daughter named Sophie and a dead husband named Daniel and a closet full of scrubs and a Honda Civic. She had paid off 6 months ago. She said very clearly to herself that this was how it ended. And then the world began to vibrate. It did not start as a sound. It started as a feeling in the bones of the asphalt, a deep, low thrumming that traveled up through the tires of the Civic and into the steel frame of the car and into the bench seat under her. The little cubes of glass on the dashboard began to tremble. The cherry vanilla air freshener swung on its plastic hook. Dale paused. His head turned just slightly, the predator's instinct that something larger had entered the field. Hannah, half out of the window, felt the vibration too. She turned her head painfully toward the rear window of the Civic, toward the long ribbon of highway behind them. What she saw she would never forget for the rest of her life. Cresting the slight rise of the highway where the road came up out of the basin and bent toward the mountains was a wall. That was the only way to describe it. A wall of motion, a wall of chrome and leather and the deep guttural song of unmuffled engines. 50 motorcycles riding 2 abreast in a column that took up the entire width of both lanes of Highway 60 South. The afternoon sun caught their handlebars and threw the light forward in spears. The riders were dark shapes, hunched over their tanks, leather vests flapping in the wind of their own passage, the patches on their backs not yet readable but unmistakable in shape and color. White, red, white, top rocker, center patch, bottom rocker. Dale's grip on her scrub top loosened. He stepped back from the window. He took the mag light with him. The flashlight, which had felt so light and righteous in his hand 30 seconds ago, suddenly felt very heavy. He turned slowly to face the road behind them. The wall of motorcycles came down on them like weather. Hannah sliding back into the cabin of her car glass, falling from her hair, blood from the cut on her neck, running down inside the collar of her scrubs, watched the lead rider through her own broken window. He was an enormous man. He sat on the largest motorcycle she had ever seen, a Harley-Davidson Road Glide painted the color of old bone, with chrome that had been polished by hand and not by machine. He wore a sleeveless leather vest over a black t-shirt. His arms were sleeves of ink faded by time and sun. His beard was the gray of a winter sky, long enough to brush the top of his vest, and his hair, what she could see of it under the open-face helmet, was the same gray and pulled back in a braid. He was at least 60 years old. He looked like he had been carved out of something harder than rock. He raised his left fist into the air. The 50 motorcycles behind him began in perfect unison to downshift. The thunder of the engines rose, then settled, then began to spread sideways across the highway as the column split. 25 riders peeled off to the right, 25 to the left, in a maneuver that looked less like driving and more like a flock of starlings turning in the sky, a single organism with a single mind. In the space of perhaps 15 seconds, the F250 King Ranch and the 2009 Honda Civic were no longer alone on Highway 60. They were the center of a fortress. Bikes parked nose to tail in front of the Ford, blocking any forward escape. Bikes parked rear to rear behind the Civic, blocking any retreat. Bikes lined up wheel to wheel along the left against the concrete barrier and along the right against the rocky embankment. The lead rider, the gray-bearded man on the bone-colored road glide, pulled his bike up directly behind Dale's truck, killed the engine, and kicked down his stand. One by one, the other 49 engines fell silent. The silence that followed was the loudest silence Hannah Caldwell had ever heard. The wind moved in it. The ticking of cooling exhaust pipes moved in it. The far-off sound of a freight train somewhere to the east moved in it. But beneath all of those things was the particular absolute quiet of 50 men who had stopped at the same moment for the same reason and were now waiting without speaking for someone to tell them what was next. Dale Crawford stood in the middle of that silence with a maglite in one hand and the imprint of Hannah's scrub fabric still curled in the fingers of the other, and the slow dawning understanding moving up his spine that he had made in his life. A number of mistakes, but the one he had made 20 seconds ago when he had brought a steel flashlight down on the window of a small old car driven by a small tired woman was about to be, by an extraordinary margin, the worst of all of them. The lead biker swung his leg over the saddle of the road glide. He pulled the riding gloves off his hands one finger at a time and tucked them into the heavy leather belt at his waist. He began to walk toward the Honda Civic. He did not look at Dale. He walked past Dale as if Dale were not there. He walked the way a man walks who has been in fights, and walked away from them the way a man walks who has done time, and walked out of it, the way a man walks who knows that nothing on this road is going to hurt him because he has been hurt worse before and is still here. 3 other men dismounted and fell in behind him, a step back, the way subordinates walk in any disciplined organization in any part of the world. A bald giant with tribal ink crawling up his neck, a wiry man with a graying mustache, and a heavy-shouldered man whose face was a road map of old scars. Dale found his voice. It came out higher than usual with a small, involuntary crack in the middle. "Hey," he said. "Hey guys, this is a misunderstanding. She cut me off." The gray-bearded man did not stop walking. He did not turn his head. He did not appear to have heard. He arrived at the broken window of the Civic. He leaned down. He braced one heavy ringed hand on the doorframe, carefully placing his palm so as to avoid the jagged remnants of glass, and he looked into the car at Hannah Caldwell. His face up close was not the face she had thought it would be. The hard lines were there. The weather was there. The 40 years of road and wind and trouble were there. But his eyes, when they found her, his eyes were the blue of a high desert sky just before sunrise. They were not the eyes of a man who hurt people. They were the eyes of a man who had decided a long time ago where the line was and who watched very carefully who crossed it. His gaze moved from her face to the cut on her neck, from the cut on her neck to the torn collar of her scrub top, from the torn collar of her scrub top to the small plastic ID badge that was clipped slightly crooked to the chest pocket. The badge read, St. Vincent Memorial Hospital, Caldwell Hannah, registered nurse, pediatric ICU. The gray-bearded man went very still. The lines around his eyes did something Hannah could not at first identify. They moved. They softened. The mouth, which had been set in a hard, flat line under the gray beard, opened, and from the throat of this enormous man came one quiet word in a voice that was unexpectedly deep and unexpectedly gentle, the voice of someone speaking in a church or a sick room. Hannah. She stared at him. She did not know him. She had never seen him before in her life. He was the president of an outlaw motorcycle club on a highway in Phoenix, and she was a pediatric ICU nurse from the suburbs, and they had no business knowing each other's names. But he knew hers. And as she looked into those blue desert dawn eyes, set in that weathered face above that gray beard, something moved at the back of her own memory. Something from last November. Something from a long, quiet, terrible night on the ward when a 4-year-old boy named Cody had been fighting for his breath against pneumonia and sepsis, and a man, a very big, quiet man, in a leather vest, had sat in the chair in the corner of room 412, holding a small stuffed elephant in hands that were too large for it, and he had not cried, but he had not slept either, not for 3 days. The cherry vanilla air freshener was still swinging on its hook. The 50 engines were still ticking as they cooled. Behind the gray-bearded man, Dale Crawford was standing very still, the mag light hanging at his side, beginning to understand that he had picked out of all the wrong cars to attack on all the wrong highways, in all the wrong cities, in the wrong country, the one car that was not going to let him walk away. The gray-bearded man said her name a second time just to be sure. Hannah Caldwell. She nodded. She could not yet make her voice work, but she could nod, and so she did the smallest movement of her chin glass dust falling from her hair as she did it. "You worked the night shift in November of last year," he said. "Pediatric ICU, room 412. "Yes," she whispered. The word came out broken. He straightened up. He looked for one moment away from her, off toward the mountains in the east, where the light was beginning to turn the rocks the color of rust. His jaw worked. The big shoulders rose and fell once with a breath that he did not let her see the size of. Then he leaned down again. "My name is Frank Donovan," he said. "Most everybody calls me Hank. The boy in 412 was my grandson. His name is Cody." The memory landed in her then with the full weight of itself. Cody Donovan, 4 years old. Pneumonia that had gone septic. 2 days on a ventilator. 3 nights when his oxygen had dropped into the 70s and the alarms had screamed, and Hannah had stayed in that room past the end of her shift, past the end of the next nurse's shift, because Cody's parents had been driving down from Flagstaff in a snowstorm and could not get there, and the only person in the room with him had been his grandfather, a very large, quiet man in a leather vest who had not known how to hold his grandson's hand without crushing the IV. She had shown him how. She had sat next to him at 3 in the morning on a folding chair in scrubs that smelled like coffee, and she had taken his enormous, calloused hand in her own small one, and she had placed it on the bed beside Cody's, and she had told him gently, like this, slow and gentle, "You can rub his thumb. That's good. That's good. He'll feel that." And the man had not spoken. He had only nodded, and tears had slid out of the corners of his eyes and into his gray beard, and he had rubbed his grandson's thumb for the next 4 hours while Hannah charted across the room and pretended not to see. She had not known the man's name. He had not given it. The chart had said only grandfather paternal. He had come and gone in the dark hours and had never spoken to the day staff, and after Cody was discharged, she had not seen him again. Until now. "Cody," she said. The name came out of her like a small prayer. "Cody made it." "He made it because of you," Hank Donovan said. He stood up slowly. He turned away from the car. He took 2 steps, and then he turned back, and he looked at her again, and the desert dawn blue of his eyes had a film of water across it. "My grandson started kindergarten 3 weeks ago," he said. "He rode the bus by himself. He ate his snack. He came home and told us about a boy named Marcus who shared crayons with him. He's alive because you stayed lady. So I'm going to take care of this for you. You sit tight. We'll get you home." He turned away from her one more time. This time he turned to face Dale Crawford. The softness in his eyes did not so much fade as get put away. It was a thing he chose the way a man chooses to put a folded shirt back into a drawer. The hard lines came back. The mouth set again. Dale Crawford was now standing exactly where he had stopped 30 seconds ago, with the mag light hanging at the end of his right arm, and a slow, involuntary tremor working its way through the muscles of his thighs. He had not moved because the bald giant, a man named Tank Brennan, 6'5", 300 pounds, 2 felony convictions for aggravated assault that were both more than 10 years old, and 1 tour in Iraq that nobody talked about, had been standing 6 feet behind him for the entire conversation, breathing slowly, not saying anything. Hank walked back across the asphalt to where Dale was standing. He stopped 4 feet away. He folded his arms across his chest. The veins on his forearms were like the roots of trees. "Drop the flashlight," he said. Dale did not drop the flashlight. He had been bigger than other men his entire life. He had been bigger in high school, and bigger in his first marriage, and bigger on every job site, and bigger in every bar he had ever started a fight in. Being bigger had been the central organizing fact of Dale Crawford's existence for 44 years, and he could not even in this moment, when every single rational neuron in his brain was screaming at him, override it. "Look," Dale said. His voice was trying to find a register that did not exist in him. "Buddy, brother, we don't have to do this. She cut me off. She swung over in front of me. She didn't even I said, drop the flashlight. Hank's voice did not get louder. It got quieter. There is a particular quietness that men acquire after a certain age, a quietness that does not need to raise itself because what is behind it is sufficient. Hank Donovan had that quietness. Dale Crawford heard it, and his fingers, without consulting his pride, opened. The maglite hit the asphalt with a clang that bounced off the concrete divider and came back twice. It rolled 6 inches and stopped. "Tank," Hank said without turning his head. The bald giant stepped forward, leaned down, and picked the flashlight up by its head between 2 fingers, the way a man picks up evidence he intends to preserve. He walked it back toward the line of bikes and laid it on the saddle of his Harley. "Now," Hank said, "we're going to wait for the police." Dale's face, which had already been red, went a deeper color, the color of bricks. "You don't get to hold me here. You're a gang. You're an outlaw gang. I have rights. I have rights. I'm calling 911 right now, and I'm telling them you abducted me on a public highway. You ambushed my truck. You." He reached into the pocket of his cargo shorts for his phone. Hank Donovan did not move. He watched Dale fumble the phone out, drop it once on the pavement, pick it up, swipe it open with a trembling thumb. "You go right ahead," Hank said. Dale paused. There was something about the way Hank said it, something about the slow, patient amusement underneath. Dale's thumb hovered over the screen. The wiry man with the graying mustache, who had not spoken yet, took 2 steps forward. "Son," he said. His voice was different from Hank's. It was higher, slightly hoarse. He had the kind of mustache that completely concealed his upper lip, the kind of squint that lived permanently in the corners of his eyes, and he wore under his leather cut a faded olive-drab t-shirt with the words Fleet Marine Force Corpsman stenciled across the chest in cracked yellow lettering. His name was Marcus Ridley. They called him Doc. He had been a Navy hospital corpsman attached to the 1st Marine Division for 2 tours in towns whose names Dale Crawford would not have recognized, and he had stitched together more bleeding men in a single afternoon than Dale had ever met in his life. He was 68 years old. He carried in a small green canvas pouch on his belt a field medical kit that he had personally restocked every week for 41 years. "Son," Doc said again gently, "you go ahead and you call those police. You call them right now. You tell them whatever story you want to tell them, but you might want to think for a second about what they're going to see when they get here." He gestured loosely with one hand. "They're going to see her car," he said. "They're going to see that all that broken glass is on the inside of her car, son. They're going to see your boot prints in the gravel right next to her door. They're going to see your fingerprints on the door frame. And they're going to see 4 red lines down your face from her fingernails. They're going to find your flashlight with your skin cells on the grip and her glass on the head. And they're going to see a real nice cell phone video that one of my brothers started recording about 90 seconds ago from up on that ridge over there." He pointed casually up toward the rocky embankment. There was in fact a man up there. Hannah, peering through her own broken window, could just barely see him, a rider with a long brown ponytail and a smartphone in his hand, holding it steady, framing the scene. "So you go on," Doc said kindly. "You call the police, but all you're going to do is save us the trouble of dialing." Dale's thumb did not move. Slowly, he lowered the phone. The fight went out of his shoulders all at once, the way air goes out of a tire that has been punctured. He sagged against the side of his own truck. His knees did not buckle, but they wanted to. Hank Donovan turned away from him as if he had ceased to be of interest. He walked back to Hannah's window. "Doc," he said, "take care of the nurse." Doc Ridley nodded once, unstrapped the green canvas pouch from his belt, and came around to the driver's side of the Civic. He did not open the door. He could not. It was locked from the inside, and besides, he did not want to make her flinch. He crouched down outside the window so that his head was level with hers. He smiled, and the smile lifted the gray mustache like a curtain rising. "Howdy, ma'am," he said. "My name is Doc. I'm a retired corpsman. I'd like to take a look at that neck of yours and pull some glass out of your arms. Is that all right?" Hannah, who had been holding herself together with a thread no thicker than a hair, felt the thread part. She did not sob. She did not wail. She simply began to leak. Tears slid down her face in two slow, steady tracks. Her shoulders began to shake very gently, like a tree in a small wind. "My daughter," she said. "I know," Doc said. "She has a fever, the babysitter." "I know, ma'am, I know. We're going to get you to her. You just sit real still for me." He opened the pouch. He worked quickly. He had her unlock the door with one trembling hand. He swung it open, knelt on the asphalt, and went over her arms and shoulders with a pair of stainless steel tweezers and a flashlight of his own, picking the cubes of safety glass out of her skin one by one. He swabbed each small cut with antiseptic from a sealed pad. He pressed butterfly closures over the deeper ones. The cut on the back of her neck got 2 butterflies and a square of gauze taped down with surgical tape that he tore off a roll with his teeth. He did not talk while he worked. He hummed. It took Hannah a moment to recognize the tune. It was Amazing Grace. "My wife used to sing that to our boys when they were small," Doc said when he saw her listening. "I'm not as good as her. She passed 11 years back. Lung cancer, never smoked a day in her life. Go figure." "I'm sorry," Hannah said. "Don't be sorry, ma'am. We had 38 good years. That's more than most folks get." He sat back on his heels. He surveyed his work. "You're going to live," he announced. "You're going to have a couple of mean scars on your forearms, but nothing on your face, which is a mercy. The neck will heal up clean. You're a lucky woman, Mrs. Caldwell." "Miss," she said quietly, "it's just me and Sophie." Doc Ridley's eyes flickered. He did not push. "Then you're a lucky lady, Miss Caldwell." He stood up. His knees popped. He turned to Hank, who was standing 5 feet away with his arms folded, watching the road for the sirens that were just now beginning to come up out of the south. "She's going to need a tetanus booster sometime in the next 48 hours, Doc said, "and somebody to look at her hands. Got a piece of glass under the skin on the meat of her left thumb too deep for me to take out roadside, but she'll keep till she gets to a clinic." "Thanks, Doc." "My pleasure." Behind them, slumped against the side of the F-25, Dale Crawford had begun very quietly to cry. It was not a noble cry. It was not the cry of a man who had finally seen the error of his ways. It was the cry of a bully who had discovered for the first time in his adult life that he was not the biggest thing in the room, and that the consequence of that discovery was going to be substantial and personal and lasting. His shoulders shook. Snot ran from his nose into his red beard stubble. He was muttering to himself, snatches of incoherent self-justification. "She cut me off. She swung in front. She didn't even, she..." The other riders had not dismounted. They sat on their bikes in the slowly cooling sun, 50 men in leather and denim and dust, and they watched Dale cry, and they did not speak, and they did not move. There was something in their stillness that was worse than violence would have been. Violence would have ended. The stillness went on and on. A wail of sirens crested the rise behind them, and then a second. 2 Arizona Department of Public Safety cruisers came hauling down the empty southbound shoulder at high speed, throwing dust, their light bars painting the embankment in alternating bands of red and blue. They braked hard 100 feet behind the rearmost bikes and skidded to a stop with a chirp. The lead trooper was out of his vehicle before it had fully settled. His hand was on his service weapon, but not drawing. His name, stitched in white over the right pocket of his uniform, was Bradford. He had been on the job in Maricopa County for 11 years. He had responded to a great many road rage calls. He had never in his life arrived on a scene that looked like this one. He stood beside his cruiser and counted the bikes. 50, plus or minus. He keyed his shoulder mic without looking at it. "Dispatch, I'm going to need an additional unit, possibly 2 at my location, and maybe a sergeant." He took 2 steps forward. He kept both hands visible. "Gentlemen," he called out, "I'm going to ask everyone to keep their hands where I can see them. Nobody move. Nobody reach for anything. I'd like to know what happened here." Hank Donovan stepped forward slowly with both hands raised, palms open, fingers spread. He walked exactly 5 steps and stopped well inside what any reasonable trooper would call a conversational distance, and well outside what any reasonable trooper would call an immediate threat. "Afternoon, trooper," Hank said. "Name's Frank Donovan. I'm the president of the Phoenix charter of the motorcycle club whose patch you're looking at. My brothers and I were riding south on 60 about 12 minutes ago when we came up on this scene. We've got a woman in that Civic right there. Name's Hannah Caldwell. She's a nurse at St. Vincent. And we've got the gentleman over by the Ford right there who used a steel flashlight to break out her driver's side window and was attempting to physically remove her from her vehicle when we arrived. We've held the scene and rendered medical aid. We've got video. We are not armed. We are not looking for trouble. We just figured you all might want to talk to him before he drove off." Trooper Bradford absorbed this. He took a long, careful look at Dale Crawford slumped against the F-250, weeping, the front of his tank top dark with sweat, 4 red claw marks down the side of his face. He took a long, careful look at Hannah Caldwell in the driver's seat of the Civic, gauze on her neck, butterfly bandages on her arms, scrub top torn at the collar. He looked at the broken window glass scattered across the bench seat and into the footwell. He looked at the maglite resting on the saddle of Tank Brennan's Harley. He looked for 1 extra second at Hank Donovan. Hank held his gaze without blinking. "All right, Mr. Donovan," Trooper Bradford said. "I'm going to ask you and your brothers to please remain on scene for the moment while I take statements. Can you do that for me?" "We'll be right here, Trooper." "Appreciate it." Bradford turned to Dale. "Sir," he called, "step away from the truck. Hands on top of your head, please." Dale, until that moment, had still been holding out some small flicker of hope that the trooper would arrive and see in him what he saw in himself. A man wronged, a man defending his honor, a man surrounded by criminals. He looked up. He saw the trooper's eyes. He saw in those eyes none of the things he had been hoping for. He saw instead the flat, practiced calm of a man whose entire career had been spent processing exactly this kind of situation and who had no patience left for any of it. Dale tried one more time. He pushed off from the side of the truck. He took 2 staggering steps forward. He raised one trembling finger and pointed it at Hank Donovan. "He held me," Dale said. "Officer, he held me at this scene against my will. He's holding me. He had his men surround me. They're a gang. They—" "Sir," Bradford said, "I'm only going to ask you one more time. Hands on top of your head. Walk toward me, slowly." She cut me off. "Hands on your head." Dale's hands went on top of his head. He walked toward the trooper on legs that did not seem to be entirely his own. The second trooper, a younger woman with a tight blonde bun under her hat, had come around the side of the first cruiser and met him halfway, and as Dale arrived, she stepped behind him and brought his right hand down and then his left and clicked the handcuffs closed around his wrists with the satisfied finality of a key turning in an old lock. Hannah Caldwell heard that sound from inside the Civic, and her whole body, which had been a single piece of clenched wire for the last 23 minutes, unclenched all at once. She put her face in her hands, and she cried, not for fear this time, but for the simple animal relief of having survived. Doc Ridley reached through the open window and patted her shoulder once the way a man pats a horse. "There now, ma'am," he murmured. "There now, the hard part's done." He was wrong in a small way. The hard part was not done. There would be a statement to give on the side of the highway, sitting on the open tailgate of the trooper's cruiser, while Trooper Bradford wrote down every detail of every moment since the merge onto Highway 60 South. There would be a moment when she realized she was sitting on a tailgate 15 miles from her daughter, and she still had no way to get home because her car was not safe to drive, and she had not yet looked at her bank account this month, and she could not afford a tow truck. But that moment, too, would be taken care of in its time by Hank Donovan. He stood off to one side while she gave her statement. He did not interrupt. He did not approach. When Bradford asked her if she had transportation home, and she said no, "My car," and her voice broke, and she had to stop. Hank simply pulled a flip phone out of his vest pocket, walked 20 feet away to make a call. She could not hear, came back and waited. "Trooper," he said when she had finished. "We've got a flatbed at our clubhouse on Buckeye Road. We can have it here in 11 minutes. I'd like to take Miss Caldwell's car back to her residence. No charge, no obligation. I'd like to ride escort with my brothers. That all right with you, ma'am?" He directed the last question to Hannah, not the trooper. Hannah looked up at him. The afternoon had become evening without her noticing. The light was the long gold light that comes to Phoenix in the last hour before dark, the light that turns the saguaros into black silhouettes and the windows of distant buildings into small fires. Hank Donovan stood in that light with his gray beard and his ringed hands and the patch on his back catching the sun, and Hannah Caldwell, who had not let a man drive her anywhere since Daniel's funeral, opened her mouth to say no. She said yes. "Yes," she said, "please." Hank nodded once. He turned to the line of bikes, which was already without any visible signal beginning to start engines. "Brothers," he said, "we ride." Behind him, 50 kickstands rose, 50 boots came down, and the deep thunder of 50 Harley-Davidson engines rolled one after another like a string of artillery up and down the long, quiet asphalt of Highway 60 South, where the cooling air of the Arizona evening was already very faintly beginning to smell of rain. In the back of the police cruiser, Dale Crawford watched them through the cage screen, and the last thing he saw before the trooper slammed the rear door was Hank Donovan helping Hannah Caldwell out of her Civic and into the cab of an arriving flatbed tow truck, and the way she did not flinch from the giant biker's hand under her elbow, and the way the giant biker did not for 1 second presume. The tow truck driver was named Eddie Halloran. They called him Wrench. He was 56 years old, built short and wide like a fire hydrant, and he had been driving a flatbed for the Phoenix Charter for 19 years. He had a beard naturally gray and full and slightly crumb-laden from a sandwich he had been eating when Hank's call came in, and he had a habit of humming under his breath that he himself was not aware of. He hopped down from the cab, took one look at Hannah's Civic, and shook his head. "Lord have mercy," he said. "All right, sweetheart. Let me get your baby up on the flatbed and we'll have you home before dark." He worked fast. He chained the Civic, winched it, and had it secured on the flatbed in under 12 minutes, all the while keeping up a low, friendly stream of nothing talk, the weather, the Diamondbacks, the price of avocados at the Fry's on Baseline Road. He did not ask Hannah a single question about what had happened. He had been told in the brief phone call from Hank what he needed to know, and the rest was none of his business. Hannah climbed up into the cab beside him. The interior smelled of motor oil and pine air freshener and the cinnamon gum that Wrench chewed when he was driving. She fastened her seatbelt with hands that still wanted to shake. Wrench started the truck. "Now then," he said gently, looking sideways at her. "What's the address, hon?" She gave him the address. He nodded. "Nice neighborhood," he said. "My niece used to live 2 streets over from there." He put the truck in gear. As the flatbed pulled forward, Hannah turned her head and looked out the passenger window. What she saw she would carry inside her for the rest of her life. The 50 Harley-Davidsons of the Phoenix Charter had formed up around the tow truck in a moving fortress. 2 riders ahead, leading. 20 riders on the left flank riding 2 by 2. 20 riders on the right flank riding 2 by 2. 8 more in the rear. And dead center at the very back of the formation on his bone-colored road glide, Frank Donovan, 62 years old, president, watching the flank with the easy, attentive gaze of a man who had spent his whole life paying attention to the parts of his world that needed it. They rolled south on Highway 60 in that formation for 8 miles. The other traffic on the highway did what traffic always did when 50 Harleys came up behind it. It parted. It moved. It pulled to the right and let them pass, and the cars that were not paying attention got their attention paid by the deep musical thunder of 100 unmuffled engines, and they too pulled over, and so the tow truck rolled south down the center of an empty highway under a sky that was turning by slow degrees the color of an old bruise. People stopped on the overpasses to watch. People in the parking lots of the gas stations along the frontage road stopped pumping their gas to watch. A little boy, in the back seat of a minivan in the right lane, pressed his face against the window and waved at the bikers with both hands, and three of the bikers, without looking at each other, raised their left fists in unison and returned the salute. Hannah Caldwell, who had never in her life felt protected, sat in the passenger seat of a flatbed tow truck driven by a man named Wrench, and she watched the city of Phoenix open like a road in front of her. And for one moment, just one, the part of her that had been holding everything together since the morning of Daniel's accident set its load down and rested. Wrench glanced over and saw her face. "You go on and cry, hon," he said softly. "You're safe." She cried. She cried quietly. She did not sob. She cried the way a woman cries who has been holding her tears for 3 years and only now found a place where it was permitted to put them down. Wrench kept driving. They came off Highway 60 at the Harley Road exit and threaded north through residential streets where the street lights were just beginning to come on. Each time they reached an intersection, two of the lead bikers would peel off, block the cross-traffic, salute the tow truck through, and then catch up. It was practiced. It was professional. Nobody honked because nobody dared. They turned at last into a quiet cul-de-sac. Hannah's house was a small stucco bungalow with a tile roof and a yard the size of a postage stamp. A single saguaro stood in the front yard, lit faintly by the porch light. The neighbor's dog, an elderly beagle named Captain, was standing at the chain-link fence with his nose against the wire, his tail wagging. The 50 Harleys rolled into the cul-de-sac. They rolled and rolled and rolled until the entire small circle of asphalt was filled, ringed, packed with chrome and leather, the engines idling at the deep, slow burble that big V-twins make when they are doing nothing in particular. Porch lights began to flick on up and down the block. Curtains moved. The neighbor across the street, a retired postal worker named Mr. Buckholtz, who had complained about Hannah's recycling bin 3 separate times in the last 6 months, parted his blinds and stared with the slack-jawed astonishment of a man who has lived a long, quiet life and never seen anything like this, and is not sure he is seeing it now. The tow truck reversed, slowly lowering the Civic onto Hannah's driveway with the patient mechanical precision of long practice. Wrench killed the engine. He turned to Hannah. "All right, Miss Caldwell," he said. "You're home, hon. Take care of that little girl of yours." "Thank you," Hannah said. It seemed entirely insufficient. It was all she had. She climbed down from the cab on legs that had forgotten how to be legs. Her front door flew open before she had taken 2 steps. Sophie was framed in the doorway in pink pajamas, her wheat-colored hair tousled. Mr. Pancake the rabbit clutched against her chest. Behind her stood Mrs. Alvarado, the babysitter, her hand over her mouth, her eyes the size of dinner plates. Sophie did not look at her mother first. Sophie was 5 years old. Sophie looked at the motorcycles. Her small jaw fell open. "Mama," she said in a voice that contained the entire wonder of childhood. "Mama, are all those motorcycles for us?" Hannah laughed. It was the first laugh in 24 hours, and it came out as half-sob. She crossed the yard and dropped to her knees on the dry winter grass and pulled her daughter into her arms and pressed her face into the warm, small, wheat-smelling crown of her daughter's head and held her there. Sophie, after a long, obedient hug, squirmed. "Mama," she said. "Mama, are they good guys or bad guys?" Hannah lifted her head. She looked over her daughter's shoulder at Hank Donovan, who had dismounted his road glide and was walking slowly up the cracked concrete of her front walk. "They're good guys, baby," she said. Hank stopped at the bottom of the front step. He removed his open face helmet. He smoothed his gray beard with one ringed hand. He looked in the porch light like nothing so much as a tired old grandfather, which was in the parts of his life that mattered most to him, precisely what he was. Sophie, who was the most ferocious 5-year-old in Maricopa County, detached herself from her mother, marched right up to Hank Donovan, planted her tiny pink pajamaed feet on the welcome mat, looked straight up at 6 feet and 2 inches of weathered biker, and put her hands on her hips. "Are you the boss?" she demanded. Hank considered this. "I am, miss. Why are there so many of you?" "Because your mama did something good for a friend of mine, a while back." "Who?" "My grandson." Sophie absorbed this. "Is he going to play with me?" she asked. Hank smiled. It was the first full smile Hannah had seen on his face, and it changed everything about him, turned the desert stone face into a much younger one, the face he must have worn before whatever roads he had ridden had worn it down. "I think he'd like that very much, miss." He knelt down. The knee popped. He reached into his leather vest and pulled out a small embroidered patch the size of a quarter. The patch showed a winged skull, the club's mark, but rendered in cartoon style, the eyes round and friendly, the wings small. Hannah had not known that such a patch existed. She would learn later that they made them for the children of members, for grandchildren, for the kids who came around the clubhouse on Sunday afternoons when the wives brought potato salad. He held the patch out on the flat of his palm. "This is for you, miss," he said gravely. "This means you're under our protection now. You and your mama. Anybody gives you any trouble anywhere in this whole county, you tell them you know the man with the bone-colored Harley. Can you remember that?" Sophie took the patch with both hands, the way a child takes a sacrament. "The bone-colored Harley," she repeated solemnly. "Yes, miss. Thank you, Mr. Boss." "You're welcome, miss." Hank rose again with the popping knee. He turned to Hannah, who had also stood, and who was standing now in her own front yard in torn scrubs and bandages, and the slow gold dust of the porch light, and the cooling Arizona evening. He did not offer her his hand. He inclined his head the way men of his generation incline their heads to women whom they respect. "Miss Caldwell," he said, "I left a card on your kitchen counter." She blinked. He had not been in her kitchen. "My boy Wrench slipped it under your front door," Hank explained, "when we were turning the truck around. That's our clubhouse number. You call that number day or night. You got any kind of trouble, you got a flat tire, you got a man following you, you got somebody who won't leave you alone, you call. Somebody will answer. Somebody will come." "Mr. Donovan, I can't." "Yes, ma'am, you can. You did it for my grandson. We're not even, miss. We won't ever be even." He turned and he walked back down her front walk to his motorcycle. He swung his leg over the saddle. He raised his left fist. 50 engines which had been idling came up to a single deep growl that rattled the windows in their frames up and down the cul-de-sac. The lead bikes peeled out first, then the flank, then the rear. They rolled out of the cul-de-sac and onto the long, quiet residential street that led back to the highway, and the sound of them faded by slow degrees, layer by layer like an orchestra walking out of a room one section at a time, until at last there was only the wind in the saguaro and the faint click of cooling metal from the flatbed and the small, soft breathing of a 5-year-old girl who had fallen asleep against her mother's leg with a club patch clutched in her fist. That was on a Tuesday in late August. What happened after took longer. Dale Crawford was charged the following morning with 1 count of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, 1 count of unlawful imprisonment, 1 count of criminal damage in the 2nd degree, and 1 count of endangerment. The cell phone video that the long-haired biker on the embankment had filmed clean, steady, time-stamped, showing the precise moment the maglite came down on Hannah's window, left his attorney a tired man named Pulaski, who took one look at the discovery and recommended a plea with very little to work with. Dale, against his attorney's advice, insisted on going to trial. The trial, which the local paper covered in some detail, lasted 4 days. The jury, which included 2 women who were nurses and 1 man whose son drove a flatbed for a living, deliberated for 93 minutes. Dale Crawford was sentenced to 4 years in the Arizona State Prison at Florence. His contractor's license was revoked. His ex-wife was awarded full custody of their 2 children and full garnishment of his future wages for back child support. The Ford King Ranch was sold at auction. It went to a young plumber from Mesa who painted it white and used it for jobs. 2 weeks after the trial, an anonymous wire transfer hit Hannah Caldwell's checking account. It was for $47,682. That was, to the dollar, the remaining balance on the medical debt left over from Daniel Caldwell's death 3 years earlier, the helicopter transport, the trauma team, the ICU stay, during the 14 hours he had clung to life before the doctors had let him go. Hannah had been paying it down at $350 a month. She had calculated the previous January that she would be done paying it off in 11.5 years. She called the number on the card Wrench had slipped under her door. A woman answered on the second ring. The woman said her name was Linda. The woman said she did not know what Hannah was talking about. The woman said, but if she had to guess, she would guess it was something her husband had done, and her husband, like many men of his particular generation and persuasion, did not believe in being thanked for things he had decided needed doing. The woman said, honey, Frank loves you. The whole club loves you. You go on and live your life now. The woman Hannah would later learn was not Linda at all. The woman was Margaret Donovan Hank's wife. She was 61 years old, and she had been a nurse herself for 36 of those years at a hospital in Tucson before she retired. She had been the one who told Hank the previous November what kind of woman Hannah Caldwell was. She had recognized it from across the ICU. The club did other things. The club did not announce that it was doing them. A new driver's side window appeared in the Honda Civic installed for free by a glass shop on Van Buren Street, whose owner was a club associate and who refused Hannah's debit card with a smile and the words that the brother had already paid for it, ma'am, and to have a nice day. A box of groceries appeared on Hannah's front step every Friday afternoon for 6 weeks until Hannah's pantry was so full she had to call the number again and politely ask them to stop. The voice on the other end laughed and said, yes, ma'am, and stopped. A man named Tank Brennan showed up at her work 6 weeks after the incident in clean civilian clothes and waited respectfully in the hospital lobby until her shift was over, and then he handed her a heavy manila envelope. The envelope contained a check from the Phoenix Police Department for $2,000, a citizen's commendation. An award for, as the letter inside put it, demonstrating exceptional courage and composure during a violent assault on a public roadway. Tank had personally walked the recommendation through the department, which had not entirely known what to do with a recommendation that came from the president of a motorcycle club, but which had in the end agreed that the recommendation was a good one. She framed the certificate. She hung it in the hallway across from the photograph of Daniel. Cody Donovan started first grade in the fall of the following year. He was tall for his age, with the dark hair of his mother and the desert blue eyes of his grandfather. He read at a third-grade level. He had a best friend named Sophie Caldwell, whom he had met at the club's annual toy run picnic the previous October, and Sophie and Cody had decided after some negotiation that they were going to get married when they were 31, because 31 was, in Sophie's professional opinion, very old. Hank Donovan made it a habit on Friday afternoons to ride his road glide to the school and to be there leaning against the saddle in the carpool line when Sophie came running out of the building with her backpack bouncing and her wheat-colored hair flying behind her. He never gave her rides. Her mother had been very clear about that. He just stood there, the largest grandfather in the line, until her mother arrived to pick her up, and then he tipped 2 fingers off the brim of his cap and rumbled away. The other parents in the carpool line stopped being afraid of him in the 3rd week. By the 5th week, 2 of the mothers were bringing him coffee. 3 years passed. Sophie turned 8. Cody turned 9. Hannah was promoted to charge nurse on the pediatric ICU at St. Vincent, with a raise that allowed her to think for the first time about replacing the Honda Civic, though she did not because the Civic had been with her through everything, and it seemed unkind to leave it now. Daniel's photograph was still in the hallway. The grief was still there, but it had moved from the center of the house to a quieter room where she visited it on Sundays and on certain anniversaries, and where she sat with it without breaking. On a Saturday in October of that 3rd year, Hannah drove out to the desert north of Cave Creek to a property that the Phoenix Charter had owned for 40 years, where they held their annual barbecue and toy run weekend. Sophie sat in the passenger seat in cowboy boots and a denim jacket with 3 motorcycle club patches sewn on the back that Margaret Donovan had stitched for her with her own hands. Frank Donovan was sitting in a metal folding chair under the shade of a mesquite tree when they arrived. His gray beard had gone whiter at the chin. The arthritis in his right hand had worsened, and he no longer rode every weekend, only on the good days. There was a small portable oxygen tank beside the chair, although he was not at that moment using it. He saw Hannah's Civic come up the dirt road. He raised his ringed hand. She parked. Sophie was out of the car before she had the engine off, running across the dirt yard toward Cody Donovan, who was waiting at the edge of the picnic with a Nerf gun and a strategic plan. Hannah walked over to Frank. He patted the empty folding chair beside him. She sat. For a long while they did not speak. Across the yard the children shrieked and ran. Smoke rose from the barbecue pits. The desert evening was beginning. Margaret Donovan was on the porch of the main house, laughing with two other club wives about something, her hand on the shoulder of a younger woman. "How you doing, Miss Caldwell?" Frank said at last. "Good," she said. "I'm doing good, Hank. Sophie likes second grade. She likes it more than third grade is going to like her." He laughed. The laugh turned into a small dry cough which he managed and did not make a thing of. He looked out across the yard. He took a long, slow breath. "I want to tell you something," he said. "I've been meaning to tell you for a while now." She turned her head. "That day on the highway," Hank said. "August 3 years back." "Yes, I want you to know. We were on the road that afternoon because we'd just come back from a funeral up in Prescott. One of our boys, a brother named Reggie, had passed. Lung cancer. He was 68. I'd known him since I was 22. Hank, let me finish, Miss Caldwell." She waited. "We weren't supposed to be on 60 South that afternoon," he said. "We were supposed to be coming home up Interstate 17. I'd called the change of route into the chase truck because there'd been a wreck on 17 and we didn't want to sit in traffic. So we got off, we cut east, and we came down 60. 3 minutes earlier or 3 minutes later, you understand, and we'd have missed you entirely." She nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about that a lot," Hank said. His voice had gone quieter. "I've been thinking about how a man like me, a man who's done what I've done, lived how I've lived, gets to be in the right place at the right time to do a thing like that. And I don't have a real answer for it. Hank, but here's the part I want to tell you, Miss Caldwell." He turned his head. He looked at her directly with the desert dawn blue of his eyes. "Reggie, the brother we'd just buried, the reason we were on that road at all. Reggie had been in the hospital off and on for the last 2 years of his life, and the last place he was before the hospice was the oncology ward at St. Vincent Memorial." Hannah did not breathe. "I sat with him there for the last 11 nights of his life," Hank said. "2 floors up from where you work. And every night the same nurse came on to make her rounds, and she came in, and she checked his pulse, and she changed his line, and then she sat with him for a minute, even though I know she had 8 other patients down the hall. And on the night he died last Thursday, Miss Caldwell, just last Thursday, 8 days before you got off your shift and merged onto 60, that same nurse was there at 3 in the morning, and she held his hand while he went. I was there. She didn't know I was there. I was in the chair in the dark by the window. She held his hand, and she told him, 'It was all right, Reggie. You can let go now, there's nothing to be afraid of.' And he let go." He paused. He swallowed. "I never got her name. She was off shift before I came back the next morning." He looked down at his ringed hands. "It was you, Miss Caldwell." Hannah's eyes filled. "It was me," she said quietly. "It was you twice," Hank said. "First my grandson, then my oldest friend, both ends of the same chain, you and me. And 8 days later, on a stretch of highway we weren't even supposed to be on, I'm sitting on my bike behind a Ford with its hazards on, and I'm looking at a small Honda with a broken window, and I'm walking up to it, and I'm reading the ID badge on the chest of the lady inside, and the badge says, 'Caldwell Hannah Pediatric ICU.'" He shook his head slowly. "I don't know what to call a thing like that, Miss Caldwell. I never did. I'm too old to start calling it anything new now. But I know that nothing in my life has ever made me feel sure that there are some things looking out for us, some things we don't see, some things that put a tired nurse and an old biker on the same road on the same afternoon for a reason." He reached over. He laid his ringed hand on top of hers. It was the only time he ever touched her. "You take care of your girl, Miss Caldwell," he said. "I will, Hank. And let me take care of you, all of us. Let us do that. We owe you. You don't owe me anything." "Yes, ma'am, we do." The sun was going down behind the mesquite. Out in the yard, a small boy named Cody Donovan was chasing a slightly larger girl named Sophie Caldwell with a foam dart gun, and she was screaming with laughter, and her wheat-colored hair was flying behind her, and the long gold light of the Arizona evening was turning everything the color of mercy. Frank Donovan died 18 months after that conversation. He died at home in his own bed with Margaret holding his left hand and Hannah Caldwell holding his right, because Margaret had called her at 4 in the morning, and Hannah had driven across the city in her Civic, and Hank had opened his eyes one last time and looked at the two women holding his hands, and he had said very clearly, "All right." All right then. He let go. There were 840 motorcycles in the funeral procession. Hannah and Sophie rode in the lead car behind the hearse with Margaret Donovan between them. Sophie wore a small denim jacket with 3 patches on the back. Hannah wore a dress she had bought the previous week for the funeral. Margaret wore black. The procession moved down Interstate 17 at 25 miles an hour. The Arizona Department of Public Safety closed the highway in both directions for 40 minutes. People stood on the overpasses with their hats over their hearts. After the burial, after the service at the clubhouse, where men twice Hannah's age came up to her, one by one hat in hand, and told her stories about Hank she had not known and would not have asked for after the long, slow afternoon of food brought by women she did not yet know, but who already knew her. Margaret Donovan walked Hannah out to the parking lot under the desert sky. Margaret was small, smaller than Hannah had remembered. Her hair was the color of cigarette ash and pulled back in a tight, neat bun, and her eyes behind the wire-rimmed glasses she had worn since her own days on the wards were red but dry. She had cried herself out in the morning in the dark before anybody else was awake. That was how Margaret did things. She held an envelope in her hand. "He wrote this for you a year ago," she said. "Made me promise to hand it to you after. So, here." Hannah took the envelope. "Margaret," she said. "Don't," Margaret said. She held up one small hand. "Don't tell me he was a good man. I know what he was. I knew it for 41 years. Don't tell me you're sorry. Sorry doesn't fix the bed I'm sleeping in tonight." Then her face cracked the smallest crack, and Hannah did the only thing she could think to do, which was to put her arms around the smaller woman and hold her there in the parking lot under the cooling October sky, while 2 long shudders worked their way through Margaret's body and then stopped. Margaret stepped back. She straightened her cardigan. She put her glasses back on. "You come to dinner Sunday," she said. "Bring Sophie. Cody asks for her every day." "I'll come." "Good." She walked back into the clubhouse. Hannah sat in the front seat of the Civic in the gravel parking lot and opened the envelope. The letter inside was written on the back of a Harley-Davidson dealership receipt in pencil in the heavy, careful capital letters of a man who had not done much writing in his life and who took the doing of it seriously. It said this more or less: "Miss Caldwell, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I want you to know a couple of things. The first is that I never got to tell you the whole story about Reggie. I told you most of it that day under the mesquite. But what I didn't tell you was that on the night he died, before you came in, he asked me what I was scared of. I told him I was scared of dying alone the way he almost was. He said, 'Frank, I'm not alone. You're here.' And then he said, 'Frank, neither will you be.' I didn't know what he meant. I thought it was the morphine. But then you came in. And then, a month later, you were on the highway. And then I knew. So this is me telling you what I should have told you sooner. You are not just the nurse who saved my grandson. You are not just the one who held Reggie's hand. You are the answer to a thing he said to me on the last night of his life. That makes you family. Not because I say so, because that's what it is. Take care of Margaret. She acts hard, but she isn't. Take care of Cody. He's going to be a big one, and big ones need somebody to remind them to be gentle. Take care of Sophie. She's already braver than I ever was. And every once in a while, when you're driving down some piece of highway and you hear thunder behind you that doesn't have any clouds in it, you roll your window down and you wave, because that'll be us. Yours, Frank." Hannah read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully along the crease he had made in it and put it back in the envelope and slid the envelope into the glove box of the Civic where it stayed. Years later, when the Civic finally did die in a parking lot at a grocery store on a 114-degree afternoon in July, and the new owner, a college student named Becca, who paid $200 for it as a project car, opened the glove box to clean it out. She found the envelope and read the letter, and cried for a woman she had never met, and a man she had never heard of, and put the letter in a drawer in her own apartment where it lived for the rest of her life. Because some letters are like that. They keep working on whoever holds them. Hannah Caldwell got out of the Civic that October evening in the gravel parking lot of a clubhouse north of Cave Creek, and she stood under the desert sky, and she let the warm, dry wind move through her hair and across the small, bandaged scars that still showed in certain lights on the inside of her forearms. She thought about Daniel the way she did sometimes when the sky got big. She thought about how she had stood on the porch the morning the foreman from the construction company had come up the walk in his hard hat in his hands, and how she had known before he said it that her life had broken in half. She thought about how she had carried both halves of it home from the hospital wrapped in a hospital blanket, 6 months pregnant alone. She thought about how she had told herself on the bathroom floor at 3 a.m. that night that she would not let it break the baby. She would not. Whatever this took, whatever she had to do. The baby would not know that the world could do this. The baby would have a mother whose roof held, and she had done it. For 5 years she had done it. She had done it on coffee and double shifts and a paid-off Honda Civic and $350 a month to the hospital and a babysitter who left at 6. She had done it on nights when she had cried so hard in the linen closet at St. Vincent that the next nurse had come in and shut the door behind her and held her without asking what was wrong, because all of them on that ward knew. She had done it on mornings when Sophie had crawled into her bed because of a bad dream, and Hannah had lain there in the dark and counted her daughter's breaths and thought, "This is the thing. This is the thing. I am alive for this small breathing thing." She had done it alone. Until one afternoon on Highway 60, when 50 men she had never met had risen up out of the road like a wave and held it for her. Until one quiet biker had taken off his sunglasses and looked at the ID badge on her chest and recognized her. Until a woman named Margaret she had not yet met had said into a telephone, "Honey, the whole club loves you." Hannah Caldwell stood in the parking lot under the desert sky, and she understood at last the way you understand a thing you have always known but never said out loud, that the roof of her life had not been the one she had been holding up by herself for 5 years. The roof of her life had been held up all along by every shift she had worked, by every small hand she had held, by every dying man she had told that it was all right to let go. She had not known. She had not known because the people who put roofs up like that almost never know until one afternoon on a stretch of highway in late August, the roof finally pays them back. She got into the Civic. She started the engine. She drove east toward the lights of Phoenix coming on across the basin, toward her daughter, toward the small stucco bungalow with the saguaro and the porch light and the beagle next door and the sleeping rabbit named Mr. Pancake on a child's bed, and the part of her that had been afraid for 5 years, the small hard knot of it that had been wound up under her sternum since the morning of the steel beam, loosened and unwound and let go. She rolled the window down. She listened for a long, quiet moment to the warm desert wind moving across the highway, and she did not hear thunder behind her, not yet, not tonight, but she knew the way she now knew certain things that one day she would. And when she did, she would wave.